don't know me, I'm Mrs. Buffard. I teach in the English department here, and I direct the Teaching Fellows program. It is my pleasure to introduce Kristy, Norbert, and Abby Fabiaschi to campus today. Kristy and Abby connected while working with an organization that provided funding to programs in Asia aimed at helping survivors of human trafficking achieve fiscal independence. They are believers in the power of economic solutions for vulnerable populations. Drawn together by these shared core values and beliefs, when they realized an organization with the same mission didn't exist domestically, they decided to build one together in 2017. Empower Her Network is an organization that paves a path for survivors with a will for independence by breaking down housing barriers, financing education, and uncovering employment opportunities. Kristy and Abby believe that circumstance is all that separates us from those who are enslaved. Circumstances can be changed, and fiscal independence is key to breaking the cycle of exploitation. Empower Her Network currently operates in Connecticut, New York, Florida, Georgia, and California. In 2019, the organization plans to expand to Oregon, Minnesota, and Maryland. This is a national problem that requires national solutions. As I mentioned in my emails to both students and faculty earlier this week, Kristy and Abby deal with challenging and painful realities on a day-to-day basis in working with the women they support. Nothing visually graphic will be shown in the upcoming presentation, but they will be sharing stories about the realities of women who are sold into domestic servitude and are sex trafficked. There will be some discussion of rape and abuse. If you feel you need to talk to someone after this meeting, you're always welcome to draw on the resources available to you here. Seek out the support of faculty. Kristy Norbert is the co-founder and executive director of Empower Her Network. Kristy has spent 17 years leveraging her social worker background as an advocate for the vulnerable among us. Empower Her Network benefits from all Kristy learned and experienced during her time as the executive director of Boys Hope, Girls Hope of Maryland and Her Future Coalition. She runs transparent programs with the goal of building up those in need towards a day where they can support themselves. As Dorothy Day stated, we've all known the long loneliness, and we have found that the answer is community. When her children turned 3 and 4 in what felt like one season, Abby Fabiaschi resigned from her post as a high-tech executive to pursue writing. Her debut novel, I Liked My Life from St. Martin's Press, was an international bestseller. She has been a human rights advocate, active in the anti-human trafficking movement for 7 years, and she serves as chair of the Empower Her Network. She and her family divide their time between West Hartford, Connecticut, and Park City, Utah. When not writing or watching the comedy show that is her children, she enjoys reading across genres, skiing, and hiking. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention that Abby and I were classmates together here at Taft. I'm deeply inspired by the work that she and Kristy do. I am eagerly anticipating Abby's next in the book, and the outstanding I Liked My Life is available here in the library, but you should really go out and buy it, because not only is it a pleasure to read, but Abby also donates 20% of her author proceeds to women and children's charities around the world. Please join me in welcoming Kristy Norbert and Abby Fabiaschi.
Thank you for having us. The slides are not working, so we're gonna just do this together here, you and me. That's a little loud, let's see. So I remember sitting where you guys are all sitting, and I remember sometimes being really uninterested in what was going to be said. So I'm going to shoot to capture your attention on this topic. It's an important one, and I hope that it sparks a curiosity in you to learn more and maybe even to engage. I had a friend once compare life to a baseball game. She said everyone's born on a different base. And so if you start on third base, it's easier to get a home run, right? And it got me thinking that the bases that you're born on reflect your privilege, and your ability to be aware of that and understand that reflect your humanity. So in 1997, my father took a second mortgage out on our house, and he sent me to Taft. Believing that education begets choice, he'd been the first in his family to go to college, and he understood the importance of generational improvement. After his career took off, he told me that he'd be focusing his earnings on getting our extended family educated to sort of change the starting base for the Fabiaschi clan. but he said that he hoped when I was his age that I would be in a position where education was assumed in our family and that I would be able to look outward. And so here I am today, very jazzed to be talking to this room full of future leaders. Based on the education that you're receiving, your life has some amount of privilege in it. Maybe you were born on second or third, or maybe before you even arrived, you were tied to a home run. But today, for 30 minutes, we're going to take some time to look outward and to discuss people whose realities at birth are so dire and vulnerable that they weren't put on a base at all. They didn't even have a seat in the dugout. So human trafficking, which is also referred to as modern-day slavery, is a global epidemic. It's thought to be the fastest growing criminal industry in the world. Industry is the right word there, unfortunately. Its estimated worth is over $150 billion annually. And I want to give a couple stats to just help us all understand the size and scope of this problem. So the International Labor Organization believes 40.3 million people are currently victims of human trafficking, enslaved today in the world. And there's 3.5 million people who live in Connecticut. There's 8.5 million people who live in the state of New York. You would actually have to combine the total populations of Connecticut, New York, Vermont, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania to get to 40.3 million people. This is a big problem. Of those victims, 75% are thought to be women and girls. So that's globally. Today, for the purposes of our time that we have, we're going to talk about what's happening here in the United States. The total number of human trafficking victims domestically is estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands, and very hard to get hard data on such a criminal market, a black market. But we know that it exists in all 50 states, and we know that the number of cases identified increases annually. The problem is getting bigger, not smaller. So how does it happen? I mean, I think that's a great starting question, especially here, where we think of ourselves as a progressive, thoughtful nation. So I am going to start by talking about who traffickers target, but first I have a small aside. Nothing that we're saying here today is meant to scare anybody or to sensationalize. There's really no need to sensationalize. The stories stand for themselves. But I do think it's important to just mention that 1% of the victims do not match the profile and picture that Kristy and I are about to paint and talk about. If you've seen the documentary I Am Jane Doe, if you haven't, you should check it out, or watched the movie Taken, then you would know traffickers are kind of master manipulators. And there are instances of young women who go to college from well-to-do families who are trafficked. It's 1 in 100, 1% of the total victims that are found. But it does exist, and I think that awareness, like sitting through this talk today and understanding how it happens, is a really powerful tool. How it is much more likely that our time here helps you spot potential trafficking situations that happen and report them, or become engaged and be a part of the movement. So who do traffickers target largely? Victims are sometimes American-born, and they're sometimes immigrants, but the overwhelming majority of people targeted share some combination of 3 vulnerabilities. They're financially distressed, they're isolated, and they're in search of love and acceptance. So maybe their parents are caught in the poverty spiral and they're working 15-hour days, so there's not a lot of oversight, or they're in the foster care system, or they've had a falling out with their family and they're runaways. Or maybe, and this is a harder one to process, their families sold them into trafficking. That happens here in the United States. That's not just a foreign-born problem. Poverty and isolation are baseline realities for 99% of the traffickers' targets. So they're looking for people, especially women, who don't have a support circle and are desperate for money. And from there, they use manipulative tactics, violence, threats, deception, with the aim of securing inventory. Because that's really what people are to traffickers. They're a product that can be bought and sold and rented. So we're going to look at these tactics and how they play out. We're going to start with an example of someone who's American-born. Many victims here are groomed, is the name. Traffickers, as I said, are master manipulators, and they're known to be very charming. and smooth. And actually, if you ever listen to interviews or recordings and you hear them talk, it gives you the willies. I mean, they're smooth. So meet Anna. She was an orphan. She's been in 13 different foster care homes over 16 years. And one day she meets this guy walking home from school. They talk. He's there again the next day, and he offers to take her to the movies. And the day after that, it's pizza and ice cream. And he says he likes her company and that he can tell she's different from the other girls. He's there every day. They start spending time together, even at his apartment after school. She loves that he has an apartment, his own apartment. And a month later, he buys her a trendy pair of shoes. She can't believe he remembered her size. She just mentioned it in passing the first time that they met. And then a month after that, he gives her a heart locket, and he says he's convinced they're meant to be together. He wants to take care of her, and Anna cannot believe her luck. After a lifetime of loneliness, she has found love. Soon after, he tells Anna that his mom is sick, and he had to pay for her to go to the clinic, and now he can't make rent. And he asks if she can skip school the next day because his landlord owns a strip club, and they agreed to let her dance for payment. It's just an hour, he says. I'd have the money, but I've been spending so much of my money on you. And she agrees because she's psychologically dependent. And from there, her morality line is tested, and Anna is hooked and in. This guy is a trained trafficker. So at any time, he's grooming 10 or 15 Annas. And his whole goal is to get the relationship to this point where they're psychologically dependent. Once that happens and she's living in his apartment and eating his food, the rules change and her true hell begins. So traffickers often get victims further hooked by sometimes injecting drugs into them or presenting drugs into their life for further dependence. They will burn their documents, their identification in front of them as a way to show their ownership, that they get them to feel like there's nowhere they could possibly go. They have methods that they use that they consider breaking someone in. So when someone starts to say, I didn't sign up for this, then they'll be, gang raped repeatedly on film for hours and hours as a way to dehumanize them and make them feel like they just don't have any choice at all. So since 2000, 61,000 foster children have unresolved missing persons cases that have been closed. So that means nobody is searching for these kids. And an additional 53,000 children in the foster care system were labeled runaways as a best guess, which means nobody even bothered looking for those children. So that's 114,000 American-born kids that are unaccounted for today. And it's generally assumed that the fate of these missing children aligns with the fate of the general runaway population, which conservatively estimates that at least 1 in 7 end up victims of child sex trafficking. So grooming is one tactic. Another common bait is the promise of work and or transportation and opportunity in America. So I'm going to pause here to share a 7-minute video from the life story so that you can hear from different survivors who fell victims to these different approaches. There are some subtitles, so put your eyes and ears on and we'll give this a go. Hopefully it goes better than our slide deck.
I was born in Kingston, Jamaica. I had good memories of me, my sister, playing, swimming, my uncle teaching us how to swim, how to catch fish, crabs.
Mi niñez la describo un poco triste y contenta. Mi familia pasamos mucha
My
pobreza,
family experienced a lot of poverty,
mucha hambre.
lots of hunger.
Soñaba yo con ser
I
una
dreamt of being a
bailarina.
ballerina.
Me gustaba mucho
I liked dancing a
bailar.
lot.
Iba
I
y
would dance
bailaba
in the
en el
fields.
campo. Eso me hacía sentir bien, me hacía sentir feliz.
That made me feel happy.
De niña soñaba como cualquier niña, jugar con mis muñecas, tener un novio, sentirme amada.
Mis padres murieron siendo yo muy pequeña y me dediqué a criar a mis 2 hermanos que quedaron huérfanos. Cuando llegué aquí por primera vez a Estados Unidos, creí que podía mejorar la vida de mis hermanos, pero no fue así.
My grandma passed away. That's when I know my mom was looking about our paperwork to bring us here.
Conocí a una persona y me ofreció un trabajo que si me gustaría trabajar en una tienda de teléfonos.
Me trajeron como niñera y me dijeron que iba a cuidar a 2 niños.
My mom go to work from Monday and she didn't come home till Sunday, so she was never home. We just started raising ourselves. I was just doing a lot of stuff that I wasn't supposed to do.
Era muy difícil para mí aceptar mi género. Las mujeres transgénero seguimos siendo vulnerables en la calle y entonces me decidí venir a pedir asilo político a Estados Unidos.
Yo era la primera vez que yo salía de mi pueblo, nunca había salido. Pues me asusté porque él me dijo que era ahí cerca y ya habían pasado 2 horas. Tomamos un taxi y nos llevó a un pueblo que se llama Tenancingo. Cuando llegamos a la casa, lo que dijo, ya llegué y aquí está la muchacha.
En un mundo donde yo no conocía Estados Unidos. Tuve que vivir en la calle por muchos meses. Ahí conocí a una persona que dijo que me iba a ayudar. Yo confié en ella porque es una mujer transgénero muy, muy hermosa. Se miraba con estabilidad. Y me dijo, todo esto se va a acabar, ya no vas a sufrir.
I was living in a group home not too far from the projects, and they was working the strips, which was prostituting, and she asked me to go up there with her one night as a friend to look out, to make sure she was okay, and that was it.
El primero fue mi jefe. Él dijo que le pertenecía y que yo no podía decir absolutamente nada porque era de su propiedad.
Me dejaron totalmente encerrada en la casa y sin comida. Me agarró la fuerza y me violó. Era la primera vez que yo tenía relaciones con un hombre. Me di cuenta que en ese momento no se puede confiar en nadie. En nadie.
Me mantuvo encerrada y me amenazaba con matarme si yo no me acostaba con hombres.
He took all my documents and threw down the incinerator. So I didn't have no proper ID for almost 20 years. None whatsoever.
Bueno, cuando yo llegué a los Estados Unidos, desde ese momento me di cuenta que estaba empezando a vivir una pesadilla, pero no dormida, despierta.
Me aferré a los niños. Era el único escape emocional que tenía. No tenía idea de que yo estaba embarazada y lo oculté por 4 meses. Y ya no lo pude ocultar. Él me golpeó hasta que yo perdí al bebé. Había perdido absolutamente todo, ya no tenía nada por qué vivir. Estaba muerta en vida.
The very nature of being an immigrant often means that you are in the shadows, that you stay away from systems because you fear that your immigration status might be compromised. And so being visible, seeking help is not always an option. Traffickers know that, right? And so they take advantage of the most vulnerable women and girls because they know that they are less likely to seek help.
She doesn't know who to reach out to. She doesn't speak the language. She doesn't have access to her rights. She doesn't know what her rights are. She won't have access to the very basic necessities we need in order to even go into a shelter. If an immigrant woman who's been trafficked, cannot pick up the phone and call for help or report crime because she fears deportation, we're all less safe. We are saying essentially that in America, we can have 2 classes of individuals, those who can call 911 and those who can't. That's not all right.
Cuando me pasó eso, estaba completamente sola, no tenía dónde ir Cuando acudí a la organización que me brindó toda la ayuda, yo desde ese momento dije que iba a salir adelante, desde abajo, sola.
I have all my paperwork now, everything. I have my citizenship paper, I have my passport, my social security card, my driver's license, and my benefit card. Yeah, I have everything. I have more ID I can ever think of now.
Y la T-visa es para víctimas de human trafficking. Después de tanto mal que me pasó, me hace sentir libre.
Una de las cosas que nunca entendía es porque cómo había podido aguantar tanto. No sabía. Parece que cuando yo nací montada en un tren de donde trataron de tirarme a la fuerza muchas veces, pero nunca pudieron. Solo yo sabía manejarlo.
Thank you. It does not get easier to watch that. I've seen it over a dozen times. And the end provides some hope, and we're going to go through the whole cycle of trafficking. So in a couple minutes, Kristy's going to talk about furthering of those realities and those women who are still in our lives and doing well. So we heard from survivors who were sex trafficked by grooming, and then also in that video who were labor trafficked, who were lured with the false promise of a high-paying job or the opportunity of life in America. So we're going to just talk quickly about labor trafficking and then get into where you guys might fit into this. So labor trafficking occurs in numerous industries in the United States. It looks a little different and feels a little different in other countries, so I'm really speaking to the UK, developed countries, how it looks and feels. Most commonly, people are forced to work in homes as domestic servants, as you heard. They're farm workers who are coerced through violence as they harvest crops, paid little to no money. Factory workers held in inhumane conditions. Labor trafficking, though, also exists in businesses and experiences that you might have. So door-to-door selling crews coming to sell you cleaning supplies, that kind of thing. Nail salons, restaurants, construction work at carnivals and fairs. So it is highly unlikely that anyone in this room would ever be labor trafficked, because you don't need false promises of America and high-wage jobs. But it is practically certain that you've eaten food harvested by or served by slave labor. And for the spa goers among us, it is entirely possible that a trafficked person has given you a pedicure. So if you're aware of that, you can be a part of the solution. So aware how. If you've ever been somewhere gives you the willies, maybe the employees are avoiding eye contact, or their answers come off as scripted and rehearsed. We actually had a woman on our advisory board who had a cleaning crew come to her door. She's actually a researcher in human trafficking, so it was interesting. And the woman was kept looking to the side to the man at the end of the street who was parked, and all the people were going door to door, and her answers were really scripted and rehearsed, and she was able to take her in. But she's educated on the topic. But what she said really came across that scripted, that you could tell they were nervous. Maybe you're at a nail salon and no one speaks English except for the manager, and he or she is the person who takes the money and is sort of omnipresent. Really, if you can notice where people work, how they get to work, where they live, if the living quarters are attached to the restaurant or the nail salon, that's a huge red flag. If a van comes up in the morning and drops people off and then picks them up at night all together, that's a huge red flag. Do the prices just seem too good to be true? Maybe some of those things are happening and then the prices are like, whoa. So it is a little difficult to quantify, but I would say to trust your instinct. If you're at a business or an airport or a train station or a bus station and you see indicators present, report it. Obviously, if there's imminent danger, like you're at an airport and you think someone is being trafficked, then you call 911. But if you're just uncertain or suspicious, there's a national human trafficking hotline. It was going to be in big numbers right there, but it's not. But that's okay, because you weren't going to write it down and put it in your wallet anyway. I think that the important thing is to know that it's a Google search away. There's a national human trafficking hotline, and they take suspicious tips and they follow up on them, and Homeland Security and the FBI, and I mean, things come from those calls. It does make a difference. And so I'm going to pass this to Kristy, who's going to walk you through kind of the second part of the life cycle, how victims become survivors, kind of untangle themselves, and the possibility of transitioning from surviving to thriving after exploitation.
So when you see something, say something. You've heard that saying. That is so true. After one of these talks, a woman came up to me afterward and she said, Kristy, what do you think? I live in this really nice community, and really early in the morning, this van shows up. All these women from New York City get out, and then they get picked up later in the day or late at night, and they go back to New York. I said, I don't know if that's human trafficking, but you probably can call law enforcement and do something about it. And I'm pretty sure she did. So that's one way that we can become from victims to survivors, is do something about it. To be honest, there are dramatic escapes. We have a woman in our program that made a very dramatic escape in the middle of the night from the home that she was being trafficked into a Walmart parking lot. So there is that dramatic escape to become a survivor. Law enforcement is very much involved depending on the location that you're in. They do investigations and run operations to break up sex trafficking rings, labor trafficking rings in brothels, massage parlors, and then they take the women to immediate services. Sometimes, as you saw in that video, a woman has just had enough of the psychological and the physical abuse, and she finds that inner strength to just walk out. So what happens, right? What happens when they find that way out? So think about all of these immediate needs: shelter, healthcare, therapeutic support, addiction support, detox programs. For immigrants, legal support, applying for visas, advocacy, basic education, English classes. Many organizations, I pause, not many organizations, there are organizations that provide that critical emergency care. Depending on the location you are in the country, those programs run from anywhere from 3 to 24 months. But at some point, the women have to move on. That handoff back to society isn't always successful due to lack of alternatives. These immediate aftercare providers recognize those gaps in services as the women presented extreme risk for re-trafficking, homelessness, and resorting to sex work. Enter Empower Her Network. Our mission: we collaborate with ready survivors, so survivors who have had that immediate aftercare, of human trafficking who find themselves in the same vulnerable circumstance that led to their initial exploitation, by removing housing barriers, financing education, and uncovering employment opportunities. Let me break that down more. Housing. Imagine a survivor is ready for her first apartment. She can afford a monthly rent, but in order to qualify for housing, you need to go through a background check, a credit check, and supply a security deposit. As Abby mentioned earlier, a lot of these women have criminal records because of their traffickers. A lot of them have no credit or bad credit because of their trafficking time. We work with them to alleviate that cost of that security deposit and work with landlords to support them regardless of the background. Then simple things like furniture, like where do you sleep at night, we also support, and is an easier one. Employment. Imagine a survivor stable enough to have her own place and working a minimum wage job. Great, yet not sustainable. Minimum wage is not a livable wage, and our goal is to get them to steady wage employment. Oftentimes, survivors have career paths in mind, but has never given that option to pursue. We help connect them to that path. For example, a woman in her own home country was a seamstress, and she could not find steady wage employment in the United States. Empower Her Network worked with her and bought her 2 industrial-sized sewing machines, and she is now getting her business off and running. Education. Abby mentioned education begets choice. The realities of survivors of human trafficking we work with is that must always need a full-time job and consider education second. That level of will and ambition will never get, will always be something I admire. That's the level of grit that these women have. Financial aid for most traditional education programs cover some, but if they don't, there's a gap and we help fund that. There are also outliers in certificate programs or vocational programs. In fact, right now, this is a pretty great week for Empower Her Network. A woman in our program was trafficked from Russia to New York. And in Russia, she was an engineer. She came here, she's living in a shelter, and we helped get her a certificate program that is equivalent of her engineering degree. She had an interview on Tuesday at Morgan Stanley that she will be paid her worth. She gets a job, she'll be able to move out of the shelter and be fiscally independent and self-sufficient. It's a pretty good week. They said it went really well. Logistically, how does Empower Her Network work? So in each of the locations that were mentioned earlier, we have a local advocate that works with all of those local immediate aftercare agencies to identify survivors that are ready for our program. The partners, the organizations, believe that with a little bit more assistance, they can bust out of the system. Our plans with women are 12 to 18 months, again, with the goals of fiscal independence and self-sufficiency. So now we've talked about the global epidemic, what's happening in the US, how it happens, how victims become survivors, and services available both for that immediate needs and the aftercare support. That video was not easy to watch. It actually gets me a little verklempt every time I watch it because I know 3 out of those 4 women are in our program. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about these women. The woman in the video who mentioned she was pregnant and lost the baby that was trafficked as a nanny, we worked with her this happened about 11 months ago, to move into her first apartment. She moved into her first apartment, and that next morning, I called her and said, "How are you? How was the move?" And she said, "Kristy, I woke up 4 times last night." And I was like, "Oh dear, this is not a good move." And she said, "No, I woke up, I couldn't believe this was my life. I couldn't believe that I had a place to sleep and a door to lock." The woman who mentioned was trafficked for 20 years, whose papers were burned on the incinerator. Last month, she worked really hard over the summer to finally get a full-time job. Once she was able to prove that she had been working for 3 months, was able to provide pay stubs and get her first apartment, and we helped move her in last month to her first apartment. And if you go on our social media, you can see a picture of her looking out of her apartment, pointing to her full-time job that she has. And the third woman, the woman that you saw that was trafficked from Tennesingo, we worked hard with subsidizing some of her housing so she could also search for a full-time job. And as of this month, she is fiscally independent from all services. She is now taking care of her mother, who was brought here from her country, and her 6-year-old son. So circling back to something Abby said at the beginning about the baseball game, with privilege and circumstances in that analogy. So think about this last woman. Her mom didn't even get to that parking lot of that stadium, didn't even know there was a baseball game. The survivor thought she was going to the baseball game and got severely tortured in the parking lot. But that's where it ends. Her son, the cycle has ended now with her because she's now fiscally independent, and her son now has a ticket to the game. And that, to me, I can't think of anything. If I was opening a dictionary filled with hope and resiliency, it would be the picture of these women to be able to end this type of cycle.
Just gonna do just a quick close here. So we talked a lot about privilege this morning. I do believe that privilege comes with responsibility. I was raised that way. I believe that. I'm trying to raise my kids that way. And I've chosen to walk around alongside these survivors to remove barriers that weren't there for me and that I believe shouldn't be there for anybody. And you might choose something different. That's okay. That's actually great. Pick something that matters to you. but I really encourage you to choose something. If you are interested and compelled to get engaged, there are so many ways to do it, even as when you're in high school. You don't have to wait 20 years. I graduated 20 years ago. It's so sad. It's bananas. I feel really young. I feel just as young as you all are. But anyway, that's my personal thing. So if you're compelled to get engaged, there's a couple ways to do it. One is social media. It really matters. It's part of the movement. So don't stop by liking the organizations that you're interested in and the problems that they do. Share, comment, be a part of the discussion so that what was a beginning today, maybe for you, can be a beginning for other people. Empower Her Network is predominantly on Instagram and Facebook, and sometimes on Twitter. We try. So we call it a network for a reason. Oftentimes talks like this result in contacts being made. We're always looking for local and national partners that provide things like gift cards for furniture, household essentials, steady wage employment programs like with Morgan Stanley, corporate grants. So there are times in the philanthropy world where it's not what you know, but who you know, and it's a network. So after this, we'll be in the faculty lounge, and we'll be selling these beautiful, you probably can't see them. Ooh, that's probably my, these Lulu Frost bracelets for the jewelry. Savi among us, Lisa Salzers, designed these herself, and 100% of the proceeds go to our program. So we've raised almost $80,000 to date with this effort. They make a great gift, and they're for sale for $25. The symbol that she put on them is kind of a beautiful message. It symbolizes the victory of light over darkness, celebrates wisdom over ignorance, and focuses on hope where there is despair. So I super appreciate your attention this morning. I will tell you that it gives me great hope that you all sat here and listened and took this in, because you're all up next. And I believe in generational improvement. So thank you. Our email, everything's online. You can contact us. I'm happy to talk to any of you personally or anytime. Thank you.